Portfolio Playbook. This is Isaac Diop, portfolio and business strategist at Dantes Outlook. Today's going to be a change of scenery as we got our usual host of the show, Damanick Dantes, on the other line as he recently came back from his travels to the Middle East. And we're here to pick his brain and get a deeper understanding of the global investment landscape and his on-the-ground experiences in Riyadh and in Dubai. Damanick was invited as a keynote speaker to the 2025 Chartered Market Technician, or CMT, Global Investment Summit, where technical analysts and investment professionals gathered from around the world to share insights and build community. Damanick, you're back from the Middle East. It was your first time. Markets aside, what were your first impressions? What spoke to you? How are you? How are you feeling?
Thank you so much, Isak. It's great to be back. It's good to be back in the guest seat for the podcast. But yeah, the Middle East region was phenomenal. It was my first time there, and we started out our chapter meetings for the CMT Association in Riyadh. And the good thing is that I have a good friend, Nora, out there. So we spent the weekend and really learned about the culture. There's a lot of authenticity in Saudi Arabia that I appreciated. And then Dubai, of course, it's all the ritz and the glamour. But beside that, there's so much thirst for knowledge. And again, the culture was amazing. So it's a very good, different perspective to have exiting the US and experiencing the world. And I was very fortunate to have that stage. Thankful for the CMT Association and the sponsors for providing me with the opportunity. And we made a lot of new friends and new partnerships in the region. So I'm excited for what's ahead.
And it was, I imagine the weather was a bit different than your New York City where you're currently at. How was the feel of the change of culture and just the change of the environment?
Yeah, I think I adapted pretty well. As we talked prior, I'm not an airplane guy. I have a 7 hour minimum on flights. So getting there was exhausting. But like once you get out of the airport, it's kind of like you feel like you're in an oven. And but then the oven sort of brings you in and you kind of just melt into the scenery, right? As poetic as that sounds. But it was a very nice area. I stayed in Diriyah, which is their like original capital in Saudi Arabia, which was amazing. And you learn about like all of the future plans that they have. A lot of it is still under construction. So that was fantastic. Just experiencing the food was amazing, and just the hospitality of new friends, very welcoming atmosphere, and I can't wait to be back.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about the investment conferences. What was going on? What would someone that wasn't there want to know in terms of how they were set up and the conversations that you had?
So the CMT Association, which I serve on the board as, they had a plan to really develop their presence in the region. I started with their pivot towards Asia in a Mumbai conference in India. So they figured Dubai is a nice central spot, which it is. And for the conference, they had a really good sequence of different topics. They started with the basics of learning about technical analysis. They have a good partnership with the DIFC Academy on the ground. So it kicked off with that. My earlier session was about blending trend and momentum strategies. These are very basic tenets of TA, but then as you grow and develop, you learn more about the interaction of different strategies, how portfolio managers approach it. Then they delved into like wealth management. I was on a panel on that. And then you hear about how it is applied through different asset classes. Early on, the CMT Association was just focused on equities. It was in their bylaws, and then they expanded it to broader asset classes. So you had sessions on crypto, sessions on commodities, and it was just amazing. The breadth of topics and audience was great. And then separate from that, the Riyadh trip, that was mostly focused on building up the chapter presence. So not only just like CMTs on the ground, because there's only a few, there was a lot of interest in technical analysis, but also multidisciplinary. So just understanding their market structure because it's so early but developing fast, like IPO issuances, and it's very difficult combining the data for the presentation, but that also allows you to understand like, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here to get that right. So it's very like I think we have an early mover advantage for introducing the discipline to that region. And just understanding how it works and what are the pain points and also some of the opportunities.
Fantastic. And what was the investor sentiment like? Would you describe it as How did it feel?
hmm I think there was mixed views about the market in general, right? I think a lot of the different because TA is kind of it's a strict discipline, right? But then you can also have your interpretation on it, right? So a lot of people are expecting this to be like a bubble scenario, or it can continue to go on because we know valuations are stretched relative to their norm. So that's a given. But there's always, these different considerations that came about. It's very interesting because you still get the U.S. dominance in terms of the narrative. But even when you're there, it's like you hear, I just came from Riyadh where there was a blip in terms of the Tadiwal market holding support, right? And even without oil, like it's been rallying because of the opening up of the market. It was based off of news of allowing foreigners in to, invest in the region, and that's an emerging opportunity. And then you have the US where things are coming off and it's like very, very stretched. You still have this potential elsewhere. So I think it reframes the narrative to think globally because not every market is starting out at the same point, which, every investor should be doing anyway. So I think there was a wide divide in terms of the opportunity set in terms of timing, but I think everybody knows that risk on in general is getting longer and longer in the tooth.
It's funny because we recently talked about this in the recent article that we have here at Dante's Outlook in terms of how how focused investors are, even foreign investors are on the US. And a big part of that is, likely because especially on US equities that they are betting investors are betting that that the US is going to win the AI race. And it seems like, from your experiences even in the foreign markets, that's still what they're looking at. Foreign investors are piling into US equities at record levels. Um, do you feel like they are missing out on the opportunities in the local markets?
For the local investors, they naturally have to go abroad for different opportunities, diversification, because it's so limited at home. So I did hear a lot of that and saw it. I would also say, in terms of the AI narrative, every market kind of has their competitive advantage, right? So the US, it is that most of the companies are based here. But I do think down the pipeline or down the supply chain, there's still a lot of opportunities abroad, right? You have Taiwan semiconductors and, the Asian market when they came out with DeepSeek, I think it was, right? Like that kind of threw a wrench into our sort of dynamic. So I think you still have a lot of opportunities across the board. And I know within Saudi and even in the UAE, there's a lot of new partnerships that are coming from the US to develop the industries there. So in terms of IPO issuance and innovations that's going to happen, it's going to come from foreign investment and also government directive, right? I think I just saw from Deutsche Bank, they had research showing AI adoption is highest in the UAE and Singapore. And you wouldn't think that because the US is very heavily there. It's just that we have the companies, but the adoption and the drive for adoption is actually greater in emerging markets than it is here in developed markets. And I think it's because of the government initiatives to diversify away from just sort of a resource driven economy to educating their public about technology in general and also boosting up the industry. So there's a lot of support there, more so than you would probably get here. But the capital flows are beyond borders, right? So the opportunity set is so vast.
Very interesting. What about our framework at Dante's Outlook did resonate with investors over there? Was there something, a message that you wanted to convey?
Definitely. So I think that within technical analysis or even just investing in general, a lot of people will look to one indicator or one strategy and sort of they're blindsided by the cycles because every market condition is different. So I think that what we did, or what I presented, was a disciplined approach to combining trend, momentum, and dispersion, which is our three-pronged approach. And that allowed us to really talk about, some of the pitfalls of just relying on trend following, for example. The SocGen CTA trend following index was down about 10% at one point this year. And we avoided that by looking at dispersion and trimming overbought areas of the market a little bit early on. And I think it's according to our mandate, right? You don't want to be focused on one particular strategy. You want to diversify across strategies the same way that you diversify across asset classes. And I think there's really power in combining indicators to create a robust strategy. So that's what I presented. Outside of that was also on the Saudi side was avoiding the oil curse in your portfolios. So diversifying away from oil, looking at the relative strength of their various sectors, but also the relative strength of their market versus emerging markets, and then also versus the world. I think that allows you to diversify your portfolio a little bit better.
And is there anything, Dominic, that challenged your previous assumptions about the Middle East and the markets over there? I know, as investors in the US, sometimes we can get pretty focused and narrowed as we talk about on the US.
hmm
Um, but is there anything that you learned about markets in the Middle East that surprised you?
I think the vast opportunity set, it grows so fast in such a short period of time. Like I was even, talking to a friend about like the skyscrapers in Dubai. Like a lot of them were not there 5, 10 years ago, right? There's so much new development happening within the real estate market too. Um, I would say, some perceptions is like it's an oil-rich country for sure, and you would think that a lot of the capital is being directed there. But there's so many different industries. Construction is all about. You probably have a lot of mining activities, a lot of material, a lot of utilities, and a lot of these sectors that are supporting the growth for the next phase are where the opportunities are. So I definitely saw a lot of that. Financials have been great too, because a lot of these banks are involved in new developments. And I think I noticed also a push for foreign companies to have a presence there, right? And Saudi is the CAFD region. UAE also has laws that, like, if you set up a fund there or a business, you have to have a presence. So there's a lot of this pull factor in terms of just having a physical presence in that market. But I think over time, you might see the population expand and really the opportunities that are frankly endless, right?
Yeah. Finally, Dominic, one last question for you. What feeling do you have? Is there anything that you kind of have left coming back from the Middle East to the US that you feel like investors really need to pay attention to? Any new insight that you think now is the time where we need to keep our eyes open?
I would say just stick to your process. A process was a main part of that conference, risk management. It's what separates the retail trader from the professional investor. And of course, we have different time horizons, but risk management transcends your time horizon, right? Even if you're trading very, very short term, just know how much capital you have at risk, right? All the way up to a portfolio manager, know your exposures and things that we do all the time. So I would say process is number one key, but also, a soft spot too is education. Even from the professional world, there's always that hunt to learn more and always be humble. Know that you're not always the expert. Who's the expert is the market. And there's always somebody there that knows a little bit better than you. So it pushes you to learn more and adapt your approach to changing market dynamics. So, at the chapter level, in Riyadh, there was so much thirst for knowledge and the questions were challenging. Everybody wanted to know about the process. And that's what really touched me the most is just the ability to educate. Because with education, you'll start your own process, right? It's not up to me to tell you what to do. It's up to you to identify what resonates with you the most because it's your capital at risk. So I always just pass the baton over to that individual investor and just know that they are empowered through education.
That's fantastic because as the like you mentioned, the one of the difference between retail traders and more professional traders is the sticking to the process. But it's so easy for a retail trader to just style drift and change the process and the risk management techniques as the market changes. Um, but I think that risk first approach that kind of wins, and listening to the market, we think we're in control of what's going on, but really we just need to ride the wave of what the market is telling us.
Yeah, and a perfect example is um, because of the central time location of Dubai, it was very interesting when you're having dinner, the US markets are still open, right? So everybody's pulling out their phone and looking at charts, and it was hilarious because you can kind of see that trigger of just wanting to know what's going on, and it's kind of a lottery effect, right? But I think everybody in the back of their mind always knew, okay, we were just at a conference talking about risk management and all this stuff, and here we are looking at individual charts and trying to game here and there. So I think it kept everyone grounded at the very least. I hope so. That this is not just a pick it and win it market. This is something where you have to really resonate with your process, be more disciplined, and just understand that the opportunities will come to you depending on your framework rather than you just chasing around for opportunities, especially at this point in the market. Right. So I think hopefully that hit a ground with just being more disciplined and yeah, it's boring, but boring works over time. So even if the time zone is appropriate for you checking charts, the time zone is always appropriate for you to hone in on your discipline.
I think that's great. Good investing is quite boring.
Yes. Yeah, because a lot of times we spend is on adapting our process and honestly not too much about analyzing the markets. That comes at the end of the quarter. But most of the time, outside of client business development, it is really about understanding our process, right? The markets come a little bit second because we don't have control over the market. We have control over our process. So that's where I want to allocate the most of our time to. And that's to the benefit of the client at the end of the day.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dominic. Appreciate. Hopefully it was a good experience for you being on the other side. And
Yes, for sure. Absolutely.
thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you check out our latest article on how we're determining appropriate positioning for emerging markets. And you can find our newsletter as well, where we publish all of our research at dantesoutlook.com. And don't forget, up until October 31st, you'll have a 25% discount on your monthly subscription. And stay tuned for presentation slides from both conferences in Riyadh and Dubai. And we have our Q3 market intelligence coming up as well, where we're going to dive deep into everything that kind of happened throughout the quarter and what we're watching going forward. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Stay tuned, be well, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.